Well, welcome to our Women and Girls in Science workshop. We are very excited about our agenda today, and I so appreciate everyone that's attending, whether you're here by Zoom, hello to everyone on Zoom, or whether you battled the weather and got here in person. Thank you so much for doing that. My name is Louise Conrad. I am the Department of Water Resources lead scientist, which means that I have the very great pleasure of helping to track and guide the science direction of the agency, along with many other excellent members of the executive team, and also work to improve and increase consistency in our science practices in the department, and that includes science communication, which is our theme today. So I want to do one really quick interactive activity before we start. Don't worry, you don't have to get out your phone and do a Mentimeter poll. This is just going to be really quick. We're going to do a show of hands. If you are really excited about women and girls embracing careers in science, give me a show of hands. We're all really excited about that. Yes, now put your hand up again if you feel confident that you can communicate science effectively, not only to make sure that the facts are understood, but also make sure that science is valued as a service to society and is accessible to our younger generation, including girls of all backgrounds. Can we do that? We can do that. We absolutely can do that. Yeah. But it is a tall order, right? It's a tall order. And that's why we're here. Our, our theme is science communication today. And we know that when we can communicate science effectively, it's really powerful. And it can do wonders for our younger minds. It can do wonders for our ability to manage resources. But when we are off the mark with science communication and we don't engage our audiences properly, then we run the risk of leaving some to be more confused, maybe even left out or misunderstood. So we are going to talk about this today. It's of great relevance and importance to our natural resource agencies, because here at our agencies, we are all working very hard to always improve and innovate and learn more about our natural resources. As our climate changes, we continue to learn more at a very rapid pace. And the stakes are really high. The stakes are high because our natural resources, whether it's our fish, wildlife, soils, air, water, they are vital to our communities. At Department of Water Resources, we decided to plan and host this event because we have been very inspired by some of the people you are going to hear from on this agenda about how to examine how we communicate science at our agency. At the same time, we also wanted to recognize and celebrate some of the women that have made excellent, amazing contributions to our agency in the science realm. And then finally, we also wanted to have a broader conversation with others within the California Natural Resource Agency at large about science communication. Almost everyone here, I know there are some exceptions, we have some very special guests, including some next generation folks that were invited by their parents to be here. Welcome. But we hope that overall, with this being populated by Natural Resource Agency staff and employees, that this is a safe space for you to be forthcoming with your questions, your comments, your thoughts about science communication during the Q&A parts of our agenda. So our agenda today includes first a presentation of a very special and new award to recognize a truly amazing woman who has provided leadership in sciences at the Department of Water Resources. And then with this award, we're also going to be recognizing the contributions and the achievements of a woman that came before all of us. And you will hear more on that from Director Carla Nemeth in a moment. Next, we're going to receive a presentation from Dr. Faith Kearns. Dr. Faith Kearns is a scientist and a science communicator and an author of a recent book called Getting to the Heart of Science Communication, a Guide for Effective Engagement. And then finally, we're going to have an interagency panel of women leaders at natural resource agencies with Dr. Kearns. And this will be moderated by our lead deputy at DWR, Cindy Messer. So before we get started with this really exciting agenda, I just want to thank a few people that have made this event wonderful already. First and foremost, I need to thank Sabrina Washington. She is public information extraordinaire at DWR and did so many things to make this event happen. Thank you, Sabrina. I also want to thank Marcus Yee from our Delta Conveyance Office, who helped quite a bit in identifying panelists. I want to thank Heather Pruitt for her assistance with logistics and outreach. And finally, I also need to thank Bianca Sievers, who's our Deputy Director for Special Initiatives, John Andrew, our Deputy Director for Climate Resilience, Cindy Messer, and our Director, Carla Nemeth. In conversations with this group, we really framed this event together and so appreciate the rich brainstorming that happened. And without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Director Carla Nemeth to present the very first Sierra Nevada Phillips Award for Women in Water Resource Sciences.
Now? Yes. Red is good. Okay. Thank you, Louise, for that eloquent introduction of this afternoon's event. And I also want to thank everyone who braved the elements to be with us here in person, but also all of you who are joining online. Just a terrific way in which we can reach as many people as possible because we do have a rich program for you all today. I have just the distinct honor to present our inaugural award for women in science. As Louise mentioned, our official award name is the Sierra Nevada Phillips Award for Women in Water Resource Sciences. This award honors outstanding women who have provided groundbreaking leadership in water resources sciences at the California Department of Water Resources. With this award, we recognize a woman who has positioned DWR to be a leader in science-informed resource management and who has provided exceptional mentorship for the next generation of women scientists in order to maintain a vibrant and growing community of scientists in our organization. The recipient of this award is a leader in her field, setting the standard for excellence and driving the future of science forward. This is this award's inaugural year, and DWR looks forward to presenting this award to an outstanding scientist in the years to come. This award is named after Sierra Nevada Phillips, who was in and of herself a community leader and entrepreneur in her time. She was the owner of the land that later became the Phillips Snow Survey Station near Echo Summit. And this location has been part of the DWR annual snow survey since 1941. Sierra Nevada Phillips, who went by Vade, was born in Nevada City in 1854 and passed away in Placerville in May of 1921. Phillips owned and operated a summer resort business at Phillips Station from 1909 until she passed away in 1921. This 320-acre property, including the resort, was left to Phillips' daughters, Mehitable Jane Sickles and Alice Elaine Bryson Lyon. This land has been owned and passed down through successive generations of mothers and daughters of the Phillips family ever since. Getting goosebumps. In this way, Sierra Nevada Phillips laid a foundation and started a tradition of land ownership, leadership, and community building by women. This is a tradition we also cherish at the Department of Water Resources. Joining us today is Sierra Nevada Phillips' great-great-great-granddaughter, Abby Pearson Phillips. And I'd like to invite Abby up to the stage to say a little bit about her great-great-great-grandmother, Sierra Nevada Phillips. Welcome, Abby.
Hello, my name is Abby Pearson Phillips. I am the great-great-granddaughter of Sierra Nevada Phillips. I've been asked to introduce her legacy to you. I am proud and I would like to do so. I want to apologize in advance. This award is emotional for me. I live in the literal footsteps of Sierra. We have some parallels and I am honored to be given the responsibility. Here are my thoughts. To award any human by way of recognition of another seems to me the epitome of remembrance. For example, when one names a child after a friend or a relative, the honor is twofold. One, so that the essence of that person lives on, and is remembered throughout time, that transcends beyond their life. Secondly, some hope that that person named possesses traits and humble attributes of that person. For our family, some names have been passed on with just that idea. Please take, for example, Elaine, a middle name shared by my grandmother, my mother, and myself. Alice or Allison passed on to my cousin in honor of my great-grandmother, Alice Bryson Lyons. My brother Bryson in remembrance of Alice's father, inspired by the stories she would tell my mom of him. The names Mehetable and Jane, both names passed on by Sierra to her first daughter and later my great-aunt. A name is not only a word to recognize somebody by, but a name also holds a spirit of its own. Some names morph into a nickname or a short name. Nicknames or shorts can be precious and unique, like Vade. Vade is the name that Sierra was known by. After all, the woman had a lot of names, almost as many names as she had titles and jobs. Sierra Nevada Phillips Clark Bryson, mother, daughter, wife, creator, leader, visionary, excellent cook, hostess of the Sierras, entrepreneur, businesswoman, pioneer, postmistress, kind, respectful, intelligent, determined, tenacious, and an inspiration. Today, Miss Sierra Nevada's name has risen to another level. Just like her namesake, so are the mountains that surround Phillips Station at nearly 7,000 feet elevation. The spirit of her has been lifted into an honorary award. The recipient and future recipients will bestow a responsibility to not only continue their own work of excellence, but to do so with the same pioneering spirit of my great-great-grandmother. That combination and responsibility, I am confident that the recipient can gracefully handle. Allow me to describe Miss Phillips Clark Bryson. Vade came from good stock of wealth and love. She was in many ways an enigma of her time. Her parents, Joseph Wells, taught her the importance of never giving up, and her mother lived as an example of determination and endurance. Mehetable Ball Phillips was a true lady. She lived in hard country. She was a woman who physically and mentally showed the duality of the female spirit, rolling up her sleeves and working side by side with her husband, all the while to maintain a sort of feminine elegance. This couple set the outline for Sierra's life. One of my favorite stories is of the couple's arrival to the Sierra Mountains after the third trip around the Horn of Panama. JWD told his bride, Hetty, here's a good tent and here's a gun. With infant Sierra on her hip, he continued, I'll be back in a few months. I'm going to go hunt for bear. Up the mountain he went. Mehetable forged a very unique relationship with the natives of that mountain. The Washoe tribe, to my understanding, is the only tribe to tarry the long Sierra winters, only to celebrate during the sweet, dewy spring. A non-migratory tribe. Think about that. This relationship was part of Sierra's daily life. It carried on through all of her days into adulthood, business life, and motherhood. In fact, my mom can remember her grandma Alice, Sierra's youngest daughter, tell the story of how nobody, absolutely nobody, was allowed to comb her hair except for Indian Susie. During her life, Sierra resurrected 2 resorts known across the country for elegance and hospitality in the midst of the wilderness. She worked with the County of El Dorado to maintain the Rubicon Trail, a county-maintained road. A very rough and iconic road, but the road was necessary for the success of the resort in Rubicon Springs. She purchased the resort from the Hunsucker brothers in 1885 and established the 16-room hotel. The better than whiskey Mineral Springs was the draw for health-conscious peoples and those seeking healing medicine that bubbled up from the ground. Then there was the way station turned resort that she inherited and ran, Phillips Station. Now Phillips, present site of the longest partnered DWI snowpack survey site. Located at the base of Sierra Tahoe Resort, previously Sierra Ski Ranch, a unique resort partnered with the U.S. Forest Service. Phillips is occupied to date by one woman and her dog. That's me. At one time, it was bustling with activity, joy, and celebration. Vade earned the title as Hostess of the Sierras. Being an excellent cook ran in her blood. I know it seems to most of her female descendants to be carried along in our DNA. The story goes, while her mother was unable to attend dinner for her passersby, not wanting to disappoint, a young Sierra made the best meals the travelers had ever had. She had gumption even as a child. Learning to cook from her mother was just a fraction of what conveyed together. She was a woman beyond her time. In my opinion, she must have thought of herself as a person with a wealth to offer the world. I can't imagine that she would use her gender to neither hinder or excel in the world. A true student of life. A lady who took every experience and filed it into a diary of wisdom. A person who touched and influenced the lives beyond their own time. She collected names and kept them all. She honored and adored them all. From her rest, she now will add those gracious and humble names. The names not only of her female family members, but also the names of the affluent, courageous pioneers that accept this award, leaders in their field, women who inspire without intention, females who know their failures are just as important as their successes. Honesty, integrity, kindness, emotional strength, the heat inside the person that won't allow them to quit, and the insight to merely change direction. Her sophistication and confidence is inspiring. I hesitate to mention the tragedies in her life and the parallels to my own. Let it be known her life was not linear. Her world had death, injury, loss, fire, and pain. That was never a reason to stop being her best. If she were here today, I think she would sit here, hardened jaw and kind eyes upon myself and upon this audience. And my family would like to thank the Department of Water Resources and its management. We would also like to thank the recipient today for her commitment to excellence in her field.
Well, that's a tough act to follow. That was beautiful. Thank you, Abby. So I have the honor to present the first annual Sierra Nevada Phillips Award for Women in Water Resource Sciences to Ms. Dale Hoffman Flurkey for her significant contributions to the advancement of science. So I know Dale as a low-key, humble person, so she's going to have to suffer my recitation of all the wonderful contributions she made to the department. Through Dale's thoughtful leadership and true dedication, she has been an inspiration for other women and girls in science, and this award celebrates her achievements and her success. After earning her Bachelor's of Science in Fisheries Biology from Humboldt State University, Dale was hired at the Department of Water Resources as an environmental scientist. She worked in the San Joaquin District Office in Fresno for 11 years on a variety of issues, including agricultural drainage, water quality, the San Joaquin Valley Evaporation Pond investigation, and establishing the San Joaquin River Management Program. Dale moved to the Sacramento area in 1991, and in here she managed and worked on several programs that were critical issues affecting our California Water Plan, the Oroville Recreation Plan, and the Oroville Federal Energy Regulatory Commission relicensing, and lots and lots of environmental compliance. In May of 2005, Dale was appointed to lead the department's Colorado River and Salton Sea office. Under her direction, the department worked alongside state partners to complete a programmatic environmental impact report for the Salton Sea Ecosystem Restoration Program in 2007. In 2008, Dale provided environmental oversight and direction to the department's FloodSafe program and the Delta Sassoon Marsh office. Recognizing the need to ensure an environmental stewardship approach for all DWR programs, Dale helped create the department's newest office, the FloodSafe Environmental Stewardship and Statewide Resources Office. In 2009, Dale was appointed Chief of the Division of Environmental Services at DWR, overseeing a staff of 150 people and directing a wide variety of programs and activities, including providing policy and environmental guidance to DWR management. Dale was then appointed the Deputy Director for Integrated Water Management in 2010. In this position, Dale directed department activities in the divisions of safety of dams, flood management, statewide integrated water management, and integrated regional water management, as well as water conservation and climate change programs. In 2010, Dale was appointed Chief Deputy Director of DWR. That's the number 2 position at the department. In this position, she worked with state and federal partners in the implementation of the biological opinions and oversaw the development of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. Through all of these impressive and important roles at DWR, Dale consistently set an example of striving for and achieving excellence. Her inspiring example for all scientists in the department is still felt today in progressive generations of scientists. It is with tremendous gratitude for her dedicated service and in honor of her amazing contributions to the department, we present Dale Hoffman Florkey with the inaugural Sierra Nevada Phillips Award for Women in Water Resource Sciences. Dale, I'd like to invite you up to present the award. And I do want to add that for so many girls out there who are watching or have someone in their lives that who work in the scientific fields and who inspire them and help them understand what they can become. It's wonderful to be able to institutionalize the true importance of that kind of mentorship and the combination of honoring Sierra Nevada Phillips this morning, as well as Dale Hoffman Florkey, is just a terrific way to spend our afternoon. So Dale, come on up. I'd like to present you with this award.
I think we need to be out in front for some photos.
Not going to read what's printed on the award because it is essentially an encapsulation of everything that you just endured. Hearing about all those efforts and those understand the challenges of leading an organization, leading a team, and you are such a trailblazer, Dale. Thank you for being here today, and we're just so grateful for your contributions.
Well, I don't even recognize that person. I don't look like that now. Well, both those acts. Amy, you did an amazing job. As nervous as you were, you did a wonderful job of outlining what the award actually represents. And I truly appreciate your kind words. Carla, same for you. Thank you so much for all the things you said. I'm truly honored and humbled to be awarded the inaugural annual Sierra Nevada Phillips Women in Water Resource Science Award. Those that know me will recall that public speaking was my least favorite duty when I was working. I can assure you that after almost 10 years of retirement, that hasn't changed. When I started my career in DWR in the mid-70s, there were very few scientists in the department, and even fewer were women. The California Endangered Species Act and the California Environmental Quality Act had become law in 1970, and water quality regulations for delta outflow were already in place. The few department scientists were tasked to implement those regulations and keep the department in compliance with the law. Randy Brown, who remembers Randy Brown here? There's a small handful. He's been gone a long time. Rest in peace, Randy. Randy Brown was the department's lead scientist, and those hired after him took his lead on making sure that good science always played a role in decision-making. As DWR took on new programs, environmental staff increased beyond strictly compliance activities. Department scientists were tasked with many other duties, including water management planning, environmental restoration, local assistance, groundwater management, flood management, safe drinking water grant and loan programs, just to name a few, all requiring the analysis and use of scientific data. I was fortunate to have been able to hire and mentor many environmental scientists during my career, including many women who are in leadership positions today and several who have since retired. But relying solely on good science isn't enough. Key to being successful is how we communicate that good science to the supervisors in support of decisions that form recommendations for actions. This communication is necessary throughout all phases of a project and includes working with planners, managers, executives, attorneys, yes, even attorneys, and the public alike. Additionally, the same information must be communicated to those in the field, the ones that implement projects for us, whether it was for planning, maintenance, operations, or new construction. I was lucky enough to practice this communication almost daily throughout my career in and outside the department. I was not always successful on the first attempts, but always believed it was necessary and persevered to make it happen. The more time and energy put into communication, especially early on, the higher likelihood of a successful outcome. One final note before I close. The flyer announcing this workshop is titled Women and Girls in Science. It is so important to expose, nurture, and support young girls to the amazing world of science at an early age. When I was growing up, I didn't have any female role models in scientific fields, not even in college. I forged my own path because I was really interested in biology and doing anything outdoors. Thankfully, things have changed in that regard, but we can still do better, and it starts with education, encouragement, and support at an early age. What can we do? What can you do? Become active in Science Day events, school presentations, outdoor field trips, Nature Bowl, all sharing your interest and love of science and how rewarding a career in that field can be. Again, communication is key to sharing your passion with future scientists. I see many of my former colleagues in the audience today. I think it's safe to say that all of you were involved in helping communicate that science that allowed for successful project implementation to happen. You are all to be commended. I'm looking forward to hearing author Dr. Faith Kearns, as well as the panel discussion this afternoon on this very important topic. Again, thank you for bestowing upon me this incredible award. I'm truly humbled. Thank you.
That was such a wonderful series of presentations. Thank you, Dale. Congratulations, and thank you so much for everything that you've done. I can tell you that seeing you in your position when I was first starting as a supervisor in the Division of Environmental Services, it meant a lot to see you there. And I will share very briefly that one little anecdote that when I was first starting, I had written a paper and I did not expect anyone on the executive team of DWR to read that paper, but Dale did. And she called me up even and talked to me a little bit about what she thought about my paper before I submitted it for publication. And wow, that really made an impression on me, Dale. Thank you. So want to thank the Phillips family for being here. That was a wonderful, I learned so much from you, Abby. And next, I'm really pleased to introduce Faith Kearns. She, as I said before, is a scientist. She comes to us from the California Institute of Water Resources, where she is in charge of quite a bit of science communication efforts. She will tell us more about it. I will say just really briefly that her book has been the perfect springboard for us at the Department of Water Resources to start examining our science communication practices and really think about how we can be truly effective. And I can't wait to hear these messages. After that, we're going to move right into the panel session, and there will be time for question and answer after that panel session. So thank you, and please help me welcome Dr. Kearns.
Hi, everyone. So there's already a lot of feeling in the room, so we're good to go here, right? So I just want to thank everyone who was involved in putting this whole thing together. I know there's just so much work that goes into putting events together, and thank you to everyone who's here in person, who, like me, braved the weather, and who's online. It's always hard to get people's attention these days, so I appreciate it. So today I'm going to talk about a different way of communicating science than what's been talked about for most of my career, which I've been spent doing communications for longer than I've been a scientist and doing science communication since before it was called science communication, right? So I have practiced in many different sectors, academia, government, the nonprofit sector, and all those experiences will show up here. I've also worked on a lot of issues that a lot of you probably care a lot about in California, primarily water, drought, wildfire, climate change. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've learned in that process. And everything I'll be talking about is, of course, covered in my book, but I'm just going to talk about a very tiny subset of that. And I also want to say thank you to everyone. I talked to about 100 practitioners for this book, so a lot of their words I'm going to share with you, also their Twitter handles. These are all very real people. Feel free to follow them, reach out to them. I couldn't have done the book without them. So just to show you kind of where we're going, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what science communication is and how it's changing, because I think we all have sort of different ideas of that. Talk about what I think is a starter kit of sort of a 21st century science communication toolkit, um, and then talk a little bit about what things look like moving forward. So I always like to start with a definition of science communication, because I think so much disagreement about what good science communication is comes because we're all working in very, very different contexts and have very different ideas of what successful science communication looks like. So my very broad tent definition is sort of this idea of just communicating science with non-experts. And the very strong caveat that I would add to that is most of us most of the time, right? There can be this sense that because you have some amount of science training, and I don't even care how much it is, that you understand all science. And that is absolutely not the case, right? I'm an ecologist. If anything, the last few years have shown me I know nothing about epidemiology, right? So I think we can all be kind of like humble about how we think about what good science communication is as the recipients of a lot of probably confusing science communication information. I will also say that there is this very long sort of global history to science communication that people are starting to do some really interesting work on, but I am not going to focus on that today. I'm really talking about what's happened in the past 2 or 3 decades in North America, particularly the United States, where really what has tended to happen is that we have focused on performing, right? Performing scientific authority, the performance of sort of being a scientist, and this idea of sort of filling an information gap, which is also known as the deficit model. And the other thing that has really been a huge focus is this idea of sort of connecting elite scientists at elite institutions with, say, journalists and decision makers at elite institutions. So, for example, for most of my career, the epitome of good science communication was really considered to be an Ivy League professor talking with the New York Times, or giving congressional testimony, right? And what I argue in this book, as somebody who works primarily has worked in the US cooperative extension system here in California, where we do very community engaged work, is that there has been this more ground level science communication practice that has existed for a very long time, but it has tended to take very much a back seat to this other sort of high level science communication that has tended to be the focus of a lot of training for scientists over the past 2 decades or 3 decades. So it's been very influential in sort of defining what science communication is. And a lot of that comes to this sort of stage on the stage model, right? So think TED Talks. A lot of scientists of my generation have been sort of trained to really, again, perform this scientific expertise and to just give a lot of information. And I want to say right up front, not arguing that information is not important. It clearly is. But I think on its own, it doesn't offer pretty much any theory of change other than sort of an educational one, right? And I absolutely realize the irony that I am performing this role right now, right? And it's very hard to get around, and that there is a time and a place for it. But again, my argument is it's more of a starting point than the end point. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of science communication training and efforts stop. So the reality is that science communication complexity it's really intense, right? People are talking with each other about a lot of the same issues that we as science communicators might be talking with them about as well. We're not the only people providing information, right? And so even this like newly favored term, which is two-way science communication or two-way communication, really doesn't even cover it. It's more like this kind of vast ecosystem. With lots of different conversations happening, lots of different connections. And I think we know that on some level. And yet it's really hard to shift the way that we do science communication right now because it's really hard. What I'm talking about is actually really hard. It's a pretty profound shift. And so we are starting to see, I think, a shift toward what I term in my book relational or relationship centered science communication, community engagement. But it's much more about sort of communities that we're involved in, the communities that other people are a part of. And it requires a very different skill set. The other change I've seen in my career, and this is a great place to talk about it, is that the people doing science communication work has really, really changed. So again, for most of my career, it was really like we need to incentivize tenured faculty to be better science communicators. But instead, what we've seen is there are just lots of people doing science communication work. Probably a lot of people in this room are in that category, right? And so that puts people who don't have tenure, for example, in more risky positions. And it includes a lot of people who've previously been fairly marginalized within the sciences in lots of different ways, whether by gender, sexuality, ability, age, all sorts of things. And this group of people is actually changing science communication practice as they go, right? So one of these people, Sada Kahanamoku, is a native Hawaiian who recently finished their PhD at UC Berkeley, wrote about the 30-meter telescope debate, which was really up a couple years ago, but of course is ongoing. To me, this debate is not about science versus culture. In my practice of science, the two are inextricably linked. I'm Kanaka Aui, and I do science because I'm Hawaiian. I research out of Aloha a deep familial love for the land. I would say a lot of the folks that I talk to for the book are also much less interested in sort of relying on scientific authority and intellectual distance, really, as tools. They're instead very much interested in connection and consent. So, Sarah Myrie, a good colleague of mine in Washington State, climate scientist, told me the paradigm of science communication has largely been about the appropriate presentation of scientific authority, which is about divesting from your own mortal and emotional and human connections. You're forced to perform respectability, to posture. And when you try to critique that posture or even just do things differently, you become the problem instead of the thing that's actually a problem, right? And here she's hearkening to words by the feminist scholar Sarah Ahmed. And indeed, the questions, outcomes, approaches that folks are seeking these days are really different from previous science communication generations, I would say. Many of us live and work in the same place that we're talking about issues. Like for myself, I've been evacuating a fire while communicating about the fire. Right, that's a very, very different kind of prospect than people doing communication outside of any real direct ties to a place, right? So Mila Marshall also recently finished their PhD at the University of Illinois, now working with the Sierra Club, told me that, emotional intelligence and cultural understanding are really key in these kinds of situations, saying, these are deep issues. People are sometimes relying on misinformation. When you talk about difficult subjects, you have to understand you're asking people to acknowledge there's a chance that something they believe to be true, told to them by people they love and respect, is wrong. We can provide accurate information, but there also has to be somebody standing in the gap, prepared to support them through their emotions around how it feels to be corrected and the embarrassment of going hard for what you thought was the truth. This is an incredibly profound statement, right? That if we were to take seriously, would really change how we think about science communication. Finally, I spend a whole chapter of the book talking about science communication careers, because I think we're at a very interesting turning point when it comes to science communication. I believe it is truly a serious labor issue within the sciences that has implications for really the entire scientific endeavor. At this stage, most people, certainly with doctoral training and master's degrees, all of that kind of stuff, are really not going to end up in as academics, right? And so a lot of people are really interested in science communication careers right now, either as a full-time job or just part of the work that they're doing. At the same time, the path to science communication training, much less a career, is totally ineligible to most students. So, for example, Julian Reyes, who has now landed as the Climate Hub's national coordinator at the U.S. Department of Ag, talked to me shortly after he was out of graduate school, telling me, I would have liked to have more science communication as an explicit part of my training. I think graduate students are navigating the field in a piecemeal fashion that is too dependent on circumstances and a sympathetic advisor. It's not particularly equitable. And I will say that if you think it's tough for grad students and early career folks, I'm here to tell you the mid-career gets even more confusing. We've got some work to do. One of the biggest challenges, and a lot of the time that I spent on the book talking about science communication, is that a lot of us find ourselves suddenly in this situation where we're dealing with a lot of emotional, contentious, and sometimes traumatic topics, right? So we've got the kind of things I work on: water, drought, wildfire, climate change. These are things that bring up very, very strong feelings for people. And I think the thing that has really actually made the complexity of science communication legible to a much larger group of people is COVID. It used to be somewhat hard for me to talk about how emotional some of these things, like working on wildfire over the past couple decades, has been. But I think at this point, people really kind of understand it just based on COVID. That's a little bit of just, background. I want to make this really concrete. So one example of thinking about how emotions show up in water concerns, Sarah Wolf, who's a professor at Royal Roads, works on recycled drinking water issues. And basically she wrote, human emotions are complicated, so talking about them is never easy. But given the many and multiplying stresses on our drinking water systems, it's time to stop ignoring how powerful and universal emotions such as disgust both help and hinder our water decisions. So what she's really saying here is, if we want people to drink more recycled water, we have to deal with the fact that a lot of people find that idea really disgusting. And so we can take this totally rational approach, but we're missing out on this opportunity to actually take on the real disgust that people actually feel. Why pretend it's not there, right? Parisa Parsifar, who was at UC Riverside as a graduate student, now works for the National Institutes of Health, a psychologist, kind of backed this up with some of her own research experience, saying early experiences of disgust and fear are linked to water contamination beliefs and water consumption behaviors among children. Although these might seem like individual issues, fear and disgust can have far-reaching consequences. Again, she's saying kids can have these very real experiences of water tasting absolutely disgusting to them, and then they don't want to drink it. And then we end up with dehydration and things like that in schools. We can either pretend that the water doesn't taste gross, or we can actually deal with the fact that it tastes bad, right? And so anyway, that's a really concrete example of how this shows up. I also want to note that I'm talking about a lot of really heavy stuff, but there is also sort of fun and joy in a lot of this science communication work. So Malika Noko, a very good colleague of mine, a co-host of the Water Talk podcast that we also work on with Sam Sandoval, both of whom are at UC Davis, was working with some colleagues on a really serious topic, and said at the end of a week-long retreat trying to write a research paper, we created plant love stories because we wanted to focus more on plant appreciation than science and just make it fun. It makes me feel joyful and light. It makes me feel like I can be funny. I have all these parts of my personality I feel like I have to suppress for science, but with this I can be goofy and make puns and be a total plant nerd, and it's okay. So with that background, I just want to give an overview of some of the tools that I'm talking about in terms of thinking of a, updated science communication toolkit. Really, what I talk about as an overarching theme in the book and has already come up is this idea of relationship, right? So, my sense of things is that we have actually focused on this sort of micro level of communication without thinking the more meta level issue of relationship. And I really think we actually do face more of a relationship challenge than a communication challenge, thinking about things like how we relate to each other, right, as equals, versus sort of this idea that we know best and everybody else should behave the way we think they should behave based on whatever. Um, and I think that that kind of work in science communication, this relationship work, requires a really different skill set. It requires some different institutional arrangements, the focus becomes on things like listening well, working with conflict, some of the things that I'm going to go over in a second. And I want to note that relational work is super present in pretty much everything we do as humans. It's actually very interesting how much it's been taken out of a lot of science work because it is such a human endeavor. It's present in many cultural and spiritual traditions, related scholarship. For example, the feminist scholar uh, Bell Hooks worked very relationally. Many Indigenous scholars, from Kim Tallbear to Zoe Todd, write about relationality. Melanie Yahtzee, who is at the University of New Mexico, I talked to her a few years ago about the Water is Life movement. And she was doing this work on what she calls radical relationality, saying, I noticed with Water is Life, the word life in particular was about countering the politics and reality of death that resource extraction has brought to Native communities, including my own. Melanie is Navajo. I call these relations of extraction one-way relationships where resources are extracted from Native lands with no benefits to Native peoples. That leads us into this radical politics of relationality based on Indigenous understanding of kinship and simply being a good relative. The other thing that I draw from a lot in this book is that many other fields have already gone through what one might call a relational revolution. Not to say that everybody in these fields is doing it, but it's certainly a path that's available in medicine, in law, in psychotherapy, certainly. And so I talked to many, many professionals who are already working relationally, have been trained to work relationally. So, for example, Theopia Jackson, one of my absolute heroes, a clinical psychologist also working at Saybrook University, says when she thinks of working relationally, she thinks of it as a service model where she is working in service of others. And I think the really important part of this statement is she says, I can't be an expert with all the answers, right? And that, again, goes against so much science training and certainly science communication training, where you're really taught that you have to be the expert with all the answers, right? What a difference it would make. So, what does this kind of work look like in a really concrete way? Listening is super, super important, and it's one that has been completely overlooked in the sphere of science communication, which is again, very interesting in and of itself. But one story I can really tell comes from colleagues of mine at UC Cooperative Extension. So during the last drought, the 2012-2016 drought, small Hmong farmers on leased land in the Central Valley were having somewhat of a mental health crisis around some of the water allocations that they were receiving, which were not high. And my colleagues, Ruth Dahlquist Willard, who's actually an entomologist, works as a small farms advisor in Fresno, basically asked the folks she works with, what can we do to make things better for you, right? And even though it wasn't work that they would have done, that Ruth was at all trained to do, she basically did what they needed. She says, we held multilingual workshops to inform the growers of a state grant process. I will say CDFA was super helpful in being responsive to shape this grant process to be easier for small farmers. To help with energy efficiency on water pumps and get them started on their applications. They then offered basically technical assistance to make sure that those documents could come together. Those growers were able to save a ton on water and electricity. And Michael Yang, who works with us, who's Hmong himself, said, this was really crucial for them, right? I also want to note that there are ways to listen to the more than human. Don Hankins, who is Plains Miwok and a geographer at Chico State, a friend and colleague, said, there can be a sense that Indigenous knowledge is a relic of the past. This is not the case. Indigenous practices are alive and well, though they are frequently marginalized or devalued. But Indigenous knowledge brought us through the major climate events of the past and is absolutely relevant to what we face today. If we teach people to listen to the land, they'll know when it's a drought instead of being vulnerable to what nature will provide otherwise. Um, One note that I want to make, there is a whole chapter in the book on listening, so it's a pretty deeply explored topic, but I think it's really vital that we think about the ethical implications of listening. I think particularly in the hands of researchers, it can become a very, very extractive process. So Jana Lambrinidou, who's an anthropologist at Smith College, who is the only person I know who has taught listening to scientists and engineers at the collegiate level, says, listening is often diluted to become about empathy and compassion, right? When we're really talking about justice and accountability, because how scientists listen is inseparable from questions of power. It can be done in ways that bolster community knowledge and strengthen scientific understanding of real world problems, but it can also be done in ways that overlook or distort community knowledge and compromise scientists' ability to help in ways that are scientifically sound and, very importantly, actually experienced by those people as desirable and just, right? Jana did a lot of work on the lead and water issue in Flint and Washington, D.C. Conflict is the third tool that I talk about in the book, working with conflict. So when it comes to conflict, it's really challenging because so many people hate it. And then other people absolutely love conflict. So, and usually those two people do not see eye to eye in any way, right? But it's really valuable to actually see that those are two sides of the same coin. They both give conflict a tremendous amount of power. And what I argue for in the book is really this sort of middle path of trying to increase our comfort with conflict. I think it's something that in science communication in particular, we have tended to treat as something to be defeated with information. But if you think about any conflict in your life, please, please tell me that it has worked to sort it out with more information, right? So one of my favorite experiences was really watching this colleague of mine, Mark Thorne, go from very conflict avoidant to realizing he needed to be more comfortable with it, saying, he's a range advisor in Hawaii, and basically says the consequence of avoiding talking about the effects of climate change on ag production has too many negative consequences for the people I work with, and for food security in general. And so he basically is relying on these very strong relationships that he's developed over time to be able to deal with conflict a little bit better. Let's skip that one for now. So the other thing that I think is really, really important, particularly in the water sphere, is that there is this constant talk about how collaboration is better than conflict. And if I can do anything in my career, I would say that conflict is a part of collaboration. Collaboration, it does not completely solve the conflict problem. And I think, people often will use collaboration as a way to say somebody is not sort of being cooperative, when really they're just trying to voice very strong concerns about things that actually matter to them. And I think it's really important that this be an issue that we take on, particularly in the water world. So the final tool I talk about in the book is understanding trauma, right? Very relevant in California, has huge implications for how we think about these issues. So Tessa Hill, who is at UC Davis, lives in Sonoma County, and this is about the Tubbs fire, says, we woke to multiple friends asking us if we were evacuating. We launched ourselves out of bed, turned on the TV, pulled up social media feeds, and began a frantic hour of messaging friends and family trying to understand the wildfire chaos around us. By daylight, we noticed some of the ash was as big as our hands and had legible writing on it. Other pieces falling into our yard were burned fabric. The remnants of our community were falling from the sky. Tessa is a very good writer. Again, Theopia Jackson, who is somebody who deals with trauma on a daily basis, really warned me about thinking about trauma, saying that, right now, a lot of things fall into a trauma bucket, and it means very different things to different people, saying, it's really important to not just tell people they're traumatized, position them in certain ways. So thinking about that, the cultural piece is really important. And I think for this group is probably the most important piece, which is just understanding that those of us who are working on these issues all the time are also facing some amount of trauma. As somebody who has worked on wildfire issues in California for almost 20 years, for example, following those events year after year after year and like not watching things change that much definitely leads to a certain sense of vicarious trauma. Miriam Kia Keating, who's one of the only psychologists I know who's actually studied sort of post-wildfire trauma, talks about how important it is for professionals to think about their own trauma. So, in terms of moving forward, I really want to emphasize equity, inclusion, and justice. Obviously, I think I also would have, if this book were coming out now, focused a little bit more on liberatory perspectives, but it just wasn't possible at the time. One of the big challenges is that science communication training has really tended to treat all communicators as if we carry the same amount of authority, as if we're the same. And obviously, that is not true, right? And so, getting back to some of my earlier points, I just want to say science communicators are this really diverse group working with very diverse communities. And it really changes, again, what we think of as good science communication practice and training. My colleague Sergio Avila works on the border between Mexico and Arizona on large carnivore issues and sort of told me about working with ranchers between the two areas and how he had to completely shift how he thought himself as a scientist to be a good communicator, saying, too often scientists create language that is actually meant to exclude people, right? We build ourselves up as the experts, and then we're supposed to dumb down or simplify our language, which just leads to more feelings of superiority. Again, a very profound statement that I think changes the practice a lot if we take it seriously. And finally, self-care. Super, super important when you're dealing with these tough issues every single day. But I really wanted to focus on this idea of self-care as collective care as well. So Lydia Jennings, who again, one of my big heroes, now a postdoc at Duke University, is a soil scientist who works on a lot of tough issues like mining remediation. She's also a trail runner who absolutely loves being outside. And she's really managed to integrate herself into a full trifecta that she identifies as sort of being an indigenous trail running scientist. I urge everybody to follow Lydia on Instagram for lots of great content. She says, I love to be outside. I love learning more about the world every day. And I'm also committed to being an active part of a more just future. For me, science is about service, particularly for marginalized communities. So with that, I just want to leave you with a question. The book is full of a lot of questions for you to reflect on. And the main one for me is what more is possible? In my career, science communication, particularly the way it's discussed, is something that has really stagnated over the last couple decades. And I think there's a lot more that we can be doing if we sort of reimagine the field, particularly as more relational and more just. And with that, I'm going to stop and just leave you with information about how to keep in touch with me. Feel free to email me or any of those things. And we'll move on to the panel at this point. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Kearns. That was so wonderful. I'm so excited that we now have some time to get into the question of what more is possible. And I want to say really quickly, too, that if you are here in person, don't run away too quickly when we're done, because we're going to really raffle a signed copy of Faith's book. So I want to invite Dr. Kearns and Cindy Messer and the rest of our panelists to come up on stage. And as they're doing that, I would like to just say a few brief words about Cindy. She is our lead deputy at DWR. She has been our lead deputy since 2017. But like Dale, she started her career at DWR as an environmental scientist. She was an environmental scientist when I was a scientific aide. And she worked in the Division of Environmental Services, and she spent a lot of time in the field learning and looking at invertebrates in the Delta. And since then, she's had a number of roles, including Assistant Executive Officer for the Delta Conservancy and the Deputy Director for Planning at the Delta Stewardship Council. And we're so happy that she's here at DWR now. And so thank you, Cindy, for moderating. And thank you to our look at this amazing panel we have. I'm going to let you introduce the rest of the panel. Thank you.
So I am told if we hit the button on the front of these microphones and the light glows, microphones on, and we can leave them on for the duration. So make sure folks can hear us. Thank you, Louise, for the introduction. And just really quickly, I want to echo thanks to everybody who is. Thank you to everybody who's tuning in virtually. I am so honored to be part of this event today and to moderate this amazing panel of science communicators. And thank you to Dr. Kearns for the presentation. So I fessed up. I tried to make my way through the whole book, not quite there yet, but it is fabulous. I read half of it, and just kind of hearing you sort of summarize the key themes and really kind of hit some of the key points was just very amazing. So thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to run through introductions very quickly and then kind of circle back around and just warm us up with a few questions. Things that we had a chance, sorry, it seems echoey, that we had a chance to kind of talk about a little bit last week. And then if we have some more time, I've just got some more general questions to kind of throw out to the panel as well before we get to Q&A. Okay, so bear with me. I'm going to have to jump around a little bit because my order is a little different than what we have up here, which is totally fine. Okay, so right next to me here is Dr. Tani Mata, who is Director of the Environmental Farming and Innovation Office at the California Department of Food and Ag. Next to her is Lynn Takata, who is the Science Communication Lead at the Delta Science Program, which is part of the Delta Stewardship Council, which was part of my old stomping ground. So great to see you, Lynn. Okay, and next to her is Dr. Christina Sloop, who is Director for the Science Institute at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Next is Dr. Leslie Hartzell, who is lead for the Cultural Resource Division for at the California Department of Parks and Recreation, and I'll call them state parks for short. Moving ahead, so welcome. And then next we have Mary Jimenez, who is manager for the system-wide multi-benefits branch at the California Department of Water Resources, so one of my colleagues. And of course, last but not least is Dr. Faith Kearns, who I probably don't have to introduce at this point. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for your time today. Yeah. Okay, so let's launch into just a little bit of a warm up. And this way it'll allow all of you to get a better sense of the panelists, what they do, and how they use science communication in the roles that they have now. So, all right. Tani, we're going to start with you. I'm just going to roll down the line here. So, okay. So Tani, in your position as Director of the Office of Environmental Farming and Innovation at CDFA, you manage a large number of people that work on a wide variety of topics. And those are topics that are centered around innovation, especially where you have the intersection of agriculture and the environment. So thinking about external communications and the themes from Dr. Kearns' book, what are some opportunities for building relationships with the farming communities to enable effective communications on the latest science with them? And just curious, are you able to engage with communities in this kind of way? And if so, what can you tell us about the challenges or the benefits of this kind of work and engagement?
Thank you for that question. Well, I think it's important to remember that farmers and ranchers are scientists themselves. They've been experimenting on their land for, in many cases, many years, sometimes multiple generations. So I think you have to start by acknowledging that they do their own type of science and they know quite a bit. And land is so variable. The soil, the climatic regime of any given area is so specific to any particular piece of land. So making any kind of generalities based on a paper you read is not a good way to go with farmers and ranchers. So I think start there is an important step. We do a lot of partnership. I thought it was interesting in Faith's talk, she talked about some of our SWEEP program, which is for water efficiency. And we partner with the University of California, with the RCDs, with NRCS to deliver technical assistance. And what's so great about technical assistance is that I, the person that sits in the office looking at a computer screen all day, am not trying to deliver science to somebody I just met. And the same is true of my staff, who are also mostly doing this kind of administrative management. We partner with these local organizations that have deep roots and ties and history in their communities. And they're the ones who are able to navigate the most current research and science and knowledge we have about water efficiency or healthy soils or manure management, while also taking into account what that landowner knows about their land and their history on that land. So I think that really is kind of the best meeting of that. And even just for myself, it's always important to reach out and listen and make sure you're connecting with your experts. I am in no way an expert on all the topics that come through my office. And the cool thing about that is it's a really great opportunity to mentor and give the stage to a lot of the young scientists that I work with, particularly a lot of the young women who often self-censor, have an imposter syndrome about speaking up publicly. So how I do it.
Great. Thank you so much for that and for all the work you and your team do. So appreciate it. All right, Lynn. So in your role as science communication lead for the Delta Science program, your job is no small task. The Delta is one of the most studied, if not most studied, place in California. It's also a highly complex place with a rich history, with tremendous importance for fish and wildlife, while also being a center point of California's economy. But this daunting mission hasn't phased the Delta Science program, and you work to provide effective communication materials for audiences that range from K through 12 students all the way to elected officials. So if you will, tell us a little bit about teamwork within the Delta Science program to make this effective communication happen and your role in really kind of coaching and guiding your team through that work.
Sure. Thank you, Cindy.
Yeah.
So I guess I would say, in title, I am a science communication lead. My background is environmental science, and I have a master's in ecology. But I would say that pretty much what makes it work at the science program is that everybody at the science program communicates in one form or another. And so we have this great team of scientists of various levels, various specialties, given the breadth of the Delta, who are keen on trying to communicate that science to broad audiences. And so what makes it really great is the enthusiasm that a lot of the people I work with have, and the willingness to learn new ways of communicating, maybe better techniques for translating science to various audiences. Our mission at the science program is to provide the best unbiased science that we can to help with decision making. But that often means that science can be very difficult to understand if you're not a specialist in science or even in that discipline, even if you're a scientist in another discipline. And so a lot of the work I do is to try to, one, learn a lot of that science, because I am by no means an expert in many of those fields. And then two, by learning, translating that science, both for other people in the community, but also for the other folks in the program who try to communicate it. I think sometimes being a little further from the topic is almost useful, because when somebody talks to me about a topic that I'm very unfamiliar with, I take the role of somebody who's not the technical expert. And I can ask, what does that mean? Could you clarify that point for me? I think somebody in the general public probably won't know what that means. So that's a roundabout way of sort of describing the scope of the work. It's a really great place with a lot of great people, and I think that's really one of the biggest things that makes it work.
Great, thank you. And I will say it's about a 20-person team, right?
Yeah,
So
there's
you
about 20-25 folks in the science program. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a small
so you
team.
cover
Yeah.
a lot of territory, but I've always been a huge fan of the science program because you are such a nice neutral hub and really just have
Yeah.
always been great at communicating. So thank you. All right. So Christina.
Yeah.
Okay. So as director of the Science Institute at Department of Fish and Wildlife, you have worked to create a real institutional home for scientists at your organization. In this aspect of the agency, scientists can see their own work represented and align themselves with a clear mission for science that is linked to the overall mission of the organization. Yet there's also a huge focus on external communications for the Science Institute, especially around very large and complicated topics like biodiversity, climate change, and climate change impacts on fish and wildlife. So how do you balance these two very important but very different aspects of communication coming out of the Institute?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want to say I am just really thrilled to be here, and I want to personally thank Faith for her book, because in reading it, and I also just got through half of it, but I was inspired to really reflect on my path as a scientist, female scientist, and how much science communication I was actually doing in my career so far that I didn't really recognize as such. And so this is kind of a wonderful opportunity for me to kind of take stock of that and go, okay, I think we can do better, even more. And, the listening really, I took that in as a very important piece. And so to your question, the Science Institute was established in 2012 and was run by, committee for a while. And then the committee realized, well, we really need someone to take it on. And we have a large number of scientists at the Department of Fish and Wildlife that are active statewide in a variety of really important issues, drought, wildfire, human wildlife conflict, and so on, fisheries, marine, everything. I was amazed. It took me probably about a year to really learn about what we were doing, or even, still learning. And so what I do internally is really try to take our own science efforts out of their little silos. And we've created sort of a hub that allows scientists to understand more about, have access to more about what others are doing in the department. We have a scientist directory now where people, bring forth their own history and their own interest in science and so forth. And I think it's really important to do both. And a lot of our scientists also work with universities on their specific projects. But I think it will be so much better if we can share that with, others in our internal community, so that tools and procedures that we are using can be shared from someone that works in Southern California with someone that works in Northern California, and then the role of the Science Institute sort of outwardly is really then sharing what the department is doing on all of these very important issues. And so we have decided to start with these, I call them the piano keys on our Science Institute website, where, you click one of the main topics, biodiversity, genetics, wildfire, anything that we thought connectivity is an important issue. And you can learn about what's going on at the department and how science influences this, big topic and what we're doing about it. And so it's a great tool.
Great. Thank you so much. And we were talking earlier because we've had a chance to work together in the past. And I just wanted to say that I'm thrilled that you are in a position of leadership with the Science Institute. I think you just have always had a knack for communication and bringing groups together. And I am glad to know I'm not the only one that doesn't fully understand all of DFW and everything that they do. It is so multifaceted. So it's such a great resource that you and your team have created at the department. So look forward to seeing as you guys continue down the path. So thank you. All right. Let's see, Leslie, I think of my question here for you. Okay, so Leslie, you are the lead of the Cultural Resources Division for State Parks, which means you are charged with leadership in preserving and managing cultural resources, which includes everything from historic landmarks to the artifacts and archaeological record of California Native Americans' stewardship of the land since time immemorial. It strikes me that to achieve the mission of your division, you and your team must have a deep understanding of the history of the landscape and the communities around the state parks. And you must foster a meaningful relationship with these local communities. Very much along the lines of Faith's book and the themes in the book and what we heard in her talk today. So how do you approach this work or the work of building community relationships? And maybe if you could touch a little bit or share the work that you all do in terms of engagement with Native American tribes here in the state of California, because I know that's a really big part of what you all are doing.
It is. Thank you for that question. California State Parks, as many of you know, has been in existence as a system for over 100 years. Actually, we'll have our centennial for the formal creation of state parks in 2028. And what that's meant for most public is that if you go to a state park and you visit it, you see interpretive panels or museum exhibits that you expect state parks to have done a really good, thorough job doing research and putting their facts together and sharing that history. From a biological science standpoint, parks can do that pretty well. We can look at research and get information and identify the fish species or the plants, and it's not particularly controversial. But when we're talking about cultural aspects of communities and the history that's presented, and actually thinking about the fact that California Native Americans have been here since time immemorial and are the most knowledgeable about the resources and landscapes that are their ancestral lands. Whether or not Parks was doing a good job in years past to do that communication, to work with communities to share history, and whose history were we presenting, and who was being hired in Parks to do that kind of research and share that information previously. So frankly, what happened in 2020 is with the Secretary's presentation in July of that year to bring forward the importance of speaking about Black history and being honest within our departments at the governor's call to really bring access to all. And what did that mean from the standpoint of all of our departments and entities within agency? How were we going to do that? And so in the department, we huddled and got together and decided to look at this in terms of re-examining our past and really doing a deeper analysis of, what stories were we presenting well, what were we doing, how consistent were we, and were we going back to older parks and really revisiting those parks. If you visit parks, you will find some that I think are truly outstanding in how we've presented information, communicated, how we're working with communities. And in other places, we haven't had the staff, haven't had the history to come back and maybe revisit work that is quite old. I know there's a colleague sitting here who was working with us on a project some years ago that was trying to update a visitor center that was 50 years old, and one can only imagine the quality of the information being shared at that point. So we set out to develop a Re-Examine Our Past initiative, and in that we were able to successfully get funding this past fiscal year to do Tribal Lands Acknowledgements Interpretation Exhibits project that will be looking to coordinate and consult formally with tribes throughout the state. We have 280 state parks. It's about 1.6 million acres that we manage. We touch on managing currently lands that are the ancestral lands of every single California Native American tribe except for the Karuk, which we work with from a watershed standpoint. Anyway, so it's a massive endeavor with this project that we have to work with the tribes to consult on not just tribal lands acknowledgements, but really prioritizing which of the parks that we really need to prioritize a whole collaboration to redo interpretation. You might think of some of our mission sites as ones that actually need some additional work in particular. The other aspect we were able to do is get funding support under Re-Examine Our Past initiative for doing an African American history and engagement project. We have found in looking throughout our history that we have not included and not worked closely with Black communities in the state to bring forward their stories and their history in places that are actually quite important and prominent, including in gold discovery sites and enterprises. Citrus industry, that's another area where There were prominent African American contributions to development of navel oranges and citrus industry at our Cal Citrus Park. Those were stories we weren't telling. So we partnered with universities, particularly those with public history programs, to work with them to bring the next generation of graduate student researchers into parks and in community engagement, and bring those into job opportunities to hire new interpreters. So that's been a really core focus for us the last few years, and we're anxious to see those projects through.
Nice. Thank you so much. You all are just spearheading so much of this work. And I know you have a huge, we talked a little bit last week, just the number of parks, the number of sites, going back to look at the history, going back to look at maybe where there are gaps that can be filled in, or things to really kind of highlight in a different way. So my hat's off to you all. And, I look forward to having opportunities to work with you. I know we have some touch points. And so thank you for all the work you and your team do. And again, just kind of on the leading edge, I think, of helping a lot of us kind of figure out how to sort of update sites and messaging that we have. So, yeah. All right. Okay. So Mary Jimenez is, again, branch manager for the system-wide multi-benefits initiatives with the Department of Water Resources. So one of the roles that you and your team have, and it's a very high profile role, is the update of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. And first off, congratulations to you and the team for completing the latest update just back in December. So big lift, and
Thank you.
You all took it in a little bit of a different direction this time, and it's just an amazing update. So highly recommend it if folks haven't had a chance to look at it yet. But you had to do that during a time of a 3-year long drought. And others may say even longer drought than that. So, given that flood is definitely one of our most significant vulnerabilities as we see the climate changing and changing more quicker and more dramatically, can you talk a little bit about maybe the challenges drought brought in terms of engaging with the wide variety of partners that I know you have with the flood plan update, and how did you communicate, or what were the challenges around communicating the urgency of the flood plan and all the good work that it's meant to help implement in the midst of a drought?
Thank you for that question. I really appreciate it. Yes, given that the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan development is a multi-year effort, that 2022 update, we started really ramping things up back in 2019. So if you think back to 2019, that's definitely the middle of the drought for California, and focused on the Central Valley of California in particular, and the impacts of that drought in different specific areas. We had a commitment to go out early and often to talk about the themes of our plan, to talk about how we were developing the plan, but also to receive input from a wide variety of interested parties, both agency partners, the public, and all different types of folks out there, to get input to make sure that the plan that we were developing was going to be not only useful to the state of California, but also to our agency partners and all of the water management interests out there. So we started early in 2019 telling people we're developing a flood plan and it's due in 2022. So the first thing, what do people say? It's a drought. Why are you even coming to talk to me? And candidly, we had a number of folks say that. And we did our best to talk through it, to listen to them, and to also go back and talk more within our team. I was very fortunate to have a broad interdisciplinary team, both within the department and also our partnership with the Central Valley Flood Protection Board and the communications experts at the department, to really iterate on our messaging, to make sure that when we went back and continued to engage with these folks, that we were being responsive to why should you care about flooding during a drought, and to have a number of messages that not only reinforce that, but explain that in a way that's understandable. We had to do a lot of iteration. We had to be wrong a number of times and say things and have people look at us funny and then go back and try to make some adjustments in our messaging, and then go back again and hopefully get a little bit more common understanding. So by the time the Central Valley Flood Protection Board adopted the flood plan this past December,
there seemed to be a growing recognition over time of why it's still important to talk about flooding during drought, and that flood and drought are connected through the climate of extremes and the growing extremes that we are all experiencing, and why those things are inextricably connected but also urgent. There was a lot of progress made in that understanding over the past few years, but it was not without the challenges of people looking at us sideways, thinking, what do you mean by that? And having to go back and adjust our messaging and just take it to heart and say, can we explain these things better? And if so, how? So that's my version of how we work through some of the challenges.
Great, thank you. And I
Mhm.
have no doubt that it was many, many hours and kind of revisiting the conversations. And, lo and behold, about 10 days after the plan was approved, we kind of entered into a phase. And now we sort of, you think there's probably a lot of folks who kind of go back to those conversations and say, oh, yeah, right. There are those moments where we're both in drought, but also in flood event. So, it is definitely here. So thank you for that. All right. And last but definitely not least, I just have a quick question for you, Faith. So, if you wouldn't mind maybe telling us a little bit more about the California Water Institute and the audiences that you interact with, and how does the California Water Institute work with natural resource departments and agencies such as the ones represented by the panel today?
Sure. So the California Institute for Water Resources is part of the University of California's Division of Ag and Natural Resources, which is our cooperative extension branch in California. And so the cooperative extension system in the United States has been around for over 100 years. The idea is to provide a sort of translation, interpretation between research happening at the university and community needs, basically. And so the Water Institute itself also has a secondary role, which is we're one of the U.S. Geological Survey's water institutes. So there's one in every state, several territories of the United States. So about 54 of these. And the goal of those water institutes is to provide some level of coordination between all higher ed institutions in the state and agencies. And as you can imagine in California, that's incredibly complicated. When we have our 54 Institute meeting, it's very different talking to colleagues in, say, Nebraska, just because we have, 26 CSUs and 10 UCs and many, many state agencies. The fact that we're housed in the UC Cooperative Extension Branch means that we do a lot of work primarily with DWR and with CDFA. Because our primary sort of clientele, as we call folks in extension, are farmers, a lot of natural resource folks. We do have a pretty heavy emphasis on agriculture. As Tawny indicated, we do a lot of work with CDFA to do some of the technical assistance, implementation, stuff like that. And so I have taken on the role of sort of being a, know-it-all science communicator when it comes to research coming out of all the entire university system in California. And so I primarily do that through, I talk in some ways somewhat agnostic about tools in the book in terms of like thinking about social media and all these things. But on a daily basis, my life is basically like tons of social media, podcast that I host with co-host with Sam and Malika, and just a lot of the traditional things that people would think about. I write a ton about other people's research. I do a lot of synthetic work about kind of large scale issues. Things like that. So I'm very traditional science communicator in a lot of ways, but also have spent so long doing it. I have this sort of theoretical sense of like where we should be headed. So thanks for the question.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for your leadership, honestly, in science communication. And, I will say in starting to read the book, I definitely didn't have a truly deep understanding of some of the work that the extensions do and just how large, especially here in California, it is a big network. So, but just amazing to think about that being around for 100 years and that direct connection into the communities that many of us live in or work with or do research in. So thank you all around for that. Okay, so I think we have about 15 minutes, looking at Louise, until we want to do some Q&A. So I'm going to throw out a question, and Faith, I'm going to throw this one out to you first, and then I'll open it up from there. So a key theme in your book is the importance of acknowledging and incorporating emotion into communications, even when it comes to communicating scientific information. This may be especially pertinent to the climate crises and the natural disaster events for which there is an increasing risk. What is your approach to doing this, and how have you seen this play out?
Well, I will say the first talk I ever gave on this topic was in about 2010 at a very traditional professional conference. It was a very intimidating thing to talk about. And I had a lot of people come up to me afterward. There was a line of 10 or 20 people, primarily, I will say women, who came up and said, wow, that was such a brave thing to talk about. I can't believe you said that out loud. And I will say over the last, 10, 12, whatever years it's been at this point, there has been a big evolution in how people deal with some of these issues. And so the thing that I guess I want to convey from the book is that there can often be this sense that I'm really talking about a bunch of touchy-feely stuff, and that we're trying to induce emotion in other people. That is the work of marketers. That is not what I do. What I'm really trying to talk about is the fact that there is a lot of emotional stuff happening with a lot of scientific topics. And I've certainly talked to people going back much more senior than me who felt like, they had to totally suppress that part of themselves on all sorts of emotions that they were dealing with at work. And so I just want to emphasize that what I'm really trying to discuss is the fact that if we sort of don't deal with the emotions of people in a room when we're talking about a scientific topic, and I was really moved to do this work by my work on wildfire in cooperative extension, where I would end up in rooms, particularly in the early 2000s, with people who were very, very emotional about a fire. And here we were just talking like, oh yeah, you could have done this, you could have done that, you could have saved your house. And people are like, what are you doing to us right now? And I started to really realize we were being really counterproductive. And in words I would use today, we were re-traumatizing people without even paying any attention to it. And so that's really kind of what I'm trying to talk about. And the ways that I see it play out are even on a daily basis. Sometimes I'll see things like the weather that we're having right now, where, there can be a lot of sensationalistic kind of focus on things that I think that sometimes science communicators don't necessarily think about the emotional implications of the way they're going. We might have an arc storm event next week, or whatever is being said at this particular moment. That was what I saw this morning, right? Like we're going to have a flood like we haven't seen in whatever years. And and I think while those things are all true, we also have to understand that like getting attention on a topic, which is very much a sort of communication strategy, can be really scary for people. And we just have to start to take that stuff more seriously. And we don't always. The Colorado River right now is one place where I see people not taking seriously sometimes the level of like fear that people have that they're not going to have any water left, and the role that plays in actual sort of effectiveness of management, right? People are scared to death. So kind of just berating them constantly that we might all run out of water is probably not the way to go. So thanks for the question.
Could not agree more. So I'll open it up, Christina.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. And I'm reflecting on sort of my own path and all my experiences with scientists and our amazing interpreters, scientific interpreters, fish and wildlife interpreters at the department. We also own quite a bit of land, 1.1 or so million acres. And, we are out there, supporting recreation, hunting, fishing, other birding and other ways of really getting people excited about the outdoors and all of that. And I'm realizing, emotions, feelings. Why are we doing what we're doing? Because we are excited about what we're doing. And so I think in order to get a message across, you always have to connect with the other side. And so how do we do that as humans? We need our emotions, we need our feelings. And if I just stand up there and go wah 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 wah, like so many of us have experienced in certain lectures, it's not going to come across as if I'm up there arm waving, telling you stories about my real life and how exciting or how horrible that is, or, you know, trauma, the other side of the coin. So I think, you know, if we are just more honest about how we feel, we can bring that to the audience that we're talking to.
Agree. Go ahead, Tony.
I think I'll also add, because of the topic of this panel, that, you know, women are socialized to express our emotions, to maintain social relationships, close and far, and to collaborate. And that's a place where we really have an opportunity to lead, I think, in our different organizations, and to show by example how to incorporate these topics into our work at our agencies, at nonprofits, at the UCs. So I'd encourage the folks that are online and in the room to think about how you can bring those parts of you to your job.
If I could, because of the number and frequency of fires that we've been having, and the huge impacts on communities and on park staff that work in different areas of the state, like many of us have, our colleagues, where their homes have been threatened, they've had to evacuate, mostly for fires, but now for floods, other things. We've seen a lot of trauma within our own staff that have had to deal with great loss, and then sort of losing place in community because of the devastation. We've also seen a huge outpouring from communities of really care and concern about these special places that are parks, and also the collections that are in the parks that either on exhibit or stored elsewhere. Think of Weaverville Joss House, out past historic Shasta, that has been threatened multiple times and had fire through it with its incredible collections and so on. And it was very hard, I'll say, initially. You know, we have law enforcement, we have peace officers. When incident commands happen, that's, you know, connecting to Cal OES and FEMA, you know, partnering in for these events. And that's a very militaristic, top-down chain of command sort of system. And we run it multidisciplinary when we do our department operational center for incidents. And, you know, having a seat at the table as a female, cultural resources, a touchy-feely subject, you know, talking about communities and people and collections, wasn't necessarily on the radar. And I feel like I had to do a lot to communicate internally, impress upon colleagues, you know, why this is important, to look at, you know, of course, health, life, safety first and foremost in every situation, but also doing planning in advance. If we see threats coming, do we go ahead and make plans and even execute removal of collections from areas? And it's been very interesting over the last number of years as we've seen this happen over and over. You know, calling tribes up that are affected in the area, checking in on them. They are very interested in knowing sort of where the collections are. Think of places like Indian Grinding Rock, Chausey Regional Indian Museum. Those tribal communities, making sure that they are notified and can be present if we're going to go ahead and evacuate collections, and that they can be part of that and ensure that things are handled in an appropriate way. That all communities have wanted to know that evacuated collections are going to a safe and secure place. All of this is all wrapped in together, and it has changed the culture of how we're responding to our emergencies. This is now standard fare to like check in on cultural, like where are we? You know, what are the needs? Knowing that law enforcement needs to connect with that. This wasn't happening earlier on, and it's unfortunately taken a series of year after year after year incidents to really build our muscle in this way and to recognize the interconnections and the connections with the community for these important resources.
Thank you for that.
And I just wanted to, Faith's book and the discussion here is making me think a lot about past jobs I've had long ago when I was scientific aid up in the Klamath Basin, and I was doing my graduate work in the Chesapeake Bay. And I think one of the most important things to making connections with people and making connections with their emotions is to understand that you cannot understand them, their experiences, what's important to them, what is trauma to them. Like you have to learn that, or you have to sort of implement it's not necessarily knowable to you on a deep level. You can superficially sort of recognize and understand what's going on. And so I think that's a really valuable way to approach people, particularly when, we have to make changes to the way we use resources. When you're asking a rancher to irrigate differently, when you're telling them that they have to restore land that was used for other purposes. You're asking people to change their way of life, their belief system. And to recognize that that's not necessarily my belief system or my belief system. And so I can never fully understand where it's going to hurt for them, what it means to make those changes. And I think having that understanding can help communicators sort of open the door to learn a little bit about where they are and where they're coming from and the emotions that are wrapped up in an issue for them. So I just wanted to, another thing that I've thought about is, I had more opportunity to sort of engage with those impacted people when I was a field biologist, when I was out there in meeting them where they were, not intentionally, but, I was out there hacking fish in half on carcass surveys, and you run into a rancher, you run into a landowner, you run into some Native Americans doing, their activities on the river. And you have those times when you can slowly build a relationship. You're someone they see repeatedly. You can build a relationship on a personal level before then launching into some kind of, communication standpoint. And I found that as you move up in management and policy, it's harder to do that. And so one of the things that I think about often is, well, how can we rekindle those sort of relationships when you get sort of more into the managerial weeds, as it is? Not that they're bad weeds, but they're necessary weeds.
But sometimes a little removed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a little removed, yes.
Well, thank you for that. I know we're going to launch into questions, just maybe a couple quick thoughts, just to kind of wrap up the conversation. First off, I just want to say thank you. I think this was a little bit therapeutic for me today. I will say that, for many, many years, kind of coming up through the science ranks, I tend to be a little bit more informal. I love, not quite the plant nerd, but, close. And I do, tend to be a little bit more of an emotional person. So for me, when I approach people, it's kind of in that realm. And so it's, it has always felt like something that had to kind of be pushed down, and maybe, finding a place for that in the work we do. I'm much more comfortable with it now as time has gone on. Probably my age has partly to do with that. But so thank you for being willing to kind of share some of the challenges and talking about, our place and kind of bringing emotions into the conversations. And I will just observe too that we have just, you've all kind of talked about the various disasters or types of events that, cause trauma or have been really detrimental to communities. I think I just want to echo, we have seen so much of that. And I really just see it in the people that I work with, the people around me. I think we're just in a point in time right now that people are probably a little bit beaten down overall by all the trauma and the dramatic events. So, I just want to put a word out that, we owe it to each other to keep each other going, and where we can help each other through this, and the communities and the folks we love and our friends and strangers, folks we haven't met yet that we're going to be working with. So again, big thanks to our panel today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Louise.
Yeah, thank you. This was really insightful. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you to all the panelists. We do have a few questions, and I also, we could change the slide so we can go to the QR code. So we do have a little time for some question and answer. And if you are in the room, we have mics, and you can come down and ask your question, or you can just scan that QR code right from your seat and specify your question. If you're online, of course, you can use the chat function, and I will be getting those questions. So we do have one question that comes from someone on Zoom. Oh, and I wanted to say, We have over 200 people on Zoom right now, so a lot of people are listening, and I think this conversation is clearly really important to a lot of people's work. So that just speaks to the value of this event. This question is from Bethany on Zoom. To anyone on the panel, what advice would you give a girl who wants to become an expert science communicator? So many of you have PhDs. Should she get a PhD? Should she get a PhD in science? Or she should get a PhD in communication?
I can give an example of programs. I mean, one of the things when I went through is you had your major and they were formal majors. You were a historian, you were an archaeologist, whatever your science field might be. And now there's so many interdisciplinary programs and graduate degrees that kind of bring it all together. And that's why I gave the example of the public history programs we're working with state parks, where, you know, the intent is those graduate students, whether working on master's or PhD, learn how to do appropriate historical research with primary documents and so on, but they're also being trained to work in communities and do community engagement and bring together oral histories and community experiences, and then reflect those into educational interpretive programs. And I'm like, that is so cool. I wish that was there when I went to graduate school. I mean, I think that's what you can look through in some cases. You know, just there are more opportunities to do more interdisciplinary programs that can meld those. It doesn't have to be an either or.
I have so much I can say about careers, and there literally is a chapter in the book that's just about science communication careers because it's a really complicated topic. I will say there is no one formal path to becoming a science communicator at all. You see people with bachelor's degrees, master's degrees. I tried to include a lot of those folks in the book to show the diversity of kind of backgrounds that people have and the things that they're doing now. There are an increasing number of science communication programs themselves. So for example, UC Santa Cruz has a master's degree, tends to be journalists and graphics folks who do that. And I, you know, the question about a PhD is so personal, who can even say. But I will say for my own self, the thing that I really saw was it was very challenging to work with other scientists in the way that I do, where I write a lot about other people's research without having that level of background, partly because getting the PhD, I learned a lot about research, right? How to research. I knew I never wanted to be a faculty member or anything. I always wanted to be a science communicator. So just learning about research was super helpful. But I don't think there's any one clear path. And the one thing that keeps coming up on this panel that I just want to speak to, it's a very challenging topic, but it's one we need to talk about at this stage, particularly when we're talking about these emotional pieces. There's something called the feminization of a profession, right? So when we think about nurses, doctors, teachers, principals, that whole kind of dynamic of fields that become feminized, we're seeing that in science communication. And there's a great paper about it. It's something people are talking about here and there. It's really challenging because a lot, as that happens, those jobs become less prestigious. They earn less money. If you are in a position to hire science communicators, please treat them as full professionals, right? So I just think we're in danger of kind of getting to this point where it becomes something that women do, and not because it's bad that women do it, but because what happens with that is a devaluing of the field. So that's just something for everybody to kind of pay attention to as we think about what science communication career landscape and degrees and things like that look like. I do think from that perspective, a PhD is absolutely worth it. When I see the kind of, I will be frank, the kind of salary I make compared to some other folks, my PhD has been worth it.
Maybe I'll play two things off of that. One, just to play off of Faith's side, which I totally agree with, is that I think everybody has the capacity to do a lot of this emotional work. We just don't always give them the space or make them feel comfortable doing so. So 100%. As for the PhD question, I think sometimes, I don't think it's absolutely necessary. And I think sometimes we give too much space to having a PhD, and I'm looking forward to the community morphing and changing, being more open to different types and backgrounds of science communicator, because like I said, farmers and ranchers are scientists in their own right too. So I hope that we can move away from that kind of box checking of a degree and towards something that's a little bit more looking at people's broader skill set, for example, how they make relationships and form relationships and how that contributes to their ability to communicate science.
That is a wonderful question, and I agree with you, Faith. Very personal decision to do a PhD, and thanks for the input. We have two other questions that have come in from Zoom, and this first one is for Leslie specifically. Have there been any projects incorporated now that came from engaging and learning from Native American tribes?
Yeah, there's a really good one right now that's underway, so you'll have to stay tuned on this one. We're working with the Kashaya-Pomo of Stewart's Point Rancheria right now on developing content for a couple coastal trail projects. So California Coastal Trail, we're still working on building out that trail network through Metany, which is also known as Fort Ross State Historic Park, and also Salt Point, just north of there, about 7 miles. And that project is actually to develop a content for our new virtual adventure mobile app. And you can actually look this up. It's in a soft launch. We're formally launching it over Memorial Day weekend. And that project is to bring content, cultural heritage, right? So that's what I'm all about, but it doesn't have to be, it's all things, right? But we're working with the Kashaya to bring interpretation to the trail project. So this virtual adventure is an augmented virtual reality program. It can also use audio visual, and it's to allow communities, in this case, principally the Kashaya-Pomo, to tell their stories about their places and to bring forward information that has been shared by Kashaya elders in large part with different researchers from UC Berkeley and elsewhere over many years about the important places and resources on their landscapes. And so this is just a really exciting way that we are having, in this case, the Kashaya, but also other cultural groups have their voice used. So it's not us interpreting what they've told some researcher or scientist and then translated through an interpreter position to tell the public what the facts and things are, but it's actually having the Kashaya, on audio, video, explaining, and then using these great new technologies for digital media to share stories. So if you're going through the place, you can have the plants discussed, and that's presented with Kashaya elders and so on. So those are some of the ways that we're working to bring voice to communities like the tribes in these new innovative ways. And the tribe's really on board with it, and we're working through that, and we hope to have that out later in the fall.
Thank you. That's a great example. So this next question, I am thinking about Lynn's comment with being a field biologist, and through that experience, having the opportunity to talk with people that are in the community and kind of be in the environment at the same time. This question is about how do you, in your positions, coordinate with people that are on the front line being interpreters? How do we as organizations support our people that are eyes and ears and communicators on the ground? I know for state parks, there's a huge group of volunteers that are docents, and they are doing science communication every day. Also, our field biologists do that. And for CDFW, there are quite a few of them. So how do we support them in science communication, and particularly in this relational communication that we've heard about today?
That's such a good question. And I don't know that I necessarily have an answer. I have some thoughts on that. I feel like it's a cop-out to say there just aren't enough people and resources, but there really just aren't enough people, particularly at a place like the science program, and resources to do everything that we want to do. But we do try to squeeze it in every once in a while. So for example, I've been I've had the fortune to accompany Kathy Schultz, DWR's Kathy Schultz, into some classrooms to participate in some classroom engagement with middle schoolers on Delta topics, but mostly less so about teaching them facts and figures, but more about teaching them how to be curious, those sort of foundations of science, how to ask questions and be brave about asking questions. And I think one way that we're looking to expand sort of that on the ground connection is to partner with other entities that are doing it, and to contribute maybe a little bit of our knowledge and also learn from them about the best ways to communicate to specific audiences. So I think that's one great way to do it. I would say too that in the state government, it's a pretty unique thing to be able to be called a science communicator. And I feel very lucky to be able to fill that role. But it would be wonderful if there could be roles like that across different agencies. And I think it could be really useful.
So at the Department of Fish and Wildlife, we have our Office of Communication and Education and Outreach, and that team is really key in, you know, bringing together all the information, science related information, then that gets shared out to the public. And I don't know exactly how that necessarily translates to our interpreters on the ground. I want to say that the opportunity that we're taking right now on our lands is to update a lot of our interpretive signs and to bring in, you know, more information around climate and biodiversity and access to underserved communities, so that we can have a better, you know, chance at getting sort of the story updated a little bit more. And I think it's critical to continue to do all these other outreach activities that the department does at our hatcheries. We have nature centers. We have programs like Fishing in the City, where we invite people out in nature and to just kind of like get people interested in nature as a first step, and then, you know, help them learn a little bit more about, you know, the interactions, the ecology, how things work together, what the pressures are that you know we're facing, and how that might affect, you know, the resources that we're interested in. And I think I interpreted your question in a way of like, how can we, the scientists that are, you know, communicating science, help our interpreters stay relevant? And maybe that's not what you asked, but that's sort of what I'm trying to share here.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We have one more question. We are about to adjourn, but this is such a great question that we need to ask it. This comes from Rose, who I believe is here. Would you like to ask your question? Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Rose. I'm an environmental scientist with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I really appreciated Dr. Kearns's point about conflict and how conflict avoidance can be an opposite side of the coin to seeking conflict. And I think you'll appreciate, given the topic of this panel, that as a woman, I often struggle with high conflict situations. Making yourself heard in a room that often, as you get higher up towards the executive level of an agency, has a lot of men in it, can be very difficult. So I just wanted to pose to the entire panel whether you had any advice for making yourself heard in high conflict, high emotional situations such as those that are often found when we're talking about touchy scientific topics like water and drought and wildlife. Thank you.
Okay, that one.
Please, Mary.
Sure. One idea I had from my experience working in flood planning and sometimes highly emotional, contentious meetings at times, is to sit up straight. I know I'm not right now. but also to take a deep breath and speak calmly and firmly. And oftentimes, if you take that deep breath first and you try to manage your own emotions, but be clear, that can sometimes garner more attention than it would if you responded, kind of in a different way. Also say it's not always easy being a smaller woman, which I am. But sitting up straight, taking the deep breath, speaking calmly and clearly with what you want to say, oftentimes can help. It also can help, and you don't always know everyone in the room, but to the extent that you have others in the room that you already know well and are comfortable with, leveraging that familiarity and those relationships to speak together. And so you're adding your voice to theirs, you're part of the group discussion, and you're a leader in that way. So I've kind of seen it both ways, but taking the deep breath, sitting up straight. Couple ideas.
Yeah, so conflict has been for me a lifelong struggle, as it is for many, many people. Part of the entree into this work was around conflict and learning to kind of, deal better with it. I will say, so there's a lot of actual conflict training out there. I myself am very much less interested in sort of like conflict resolution, because I think a lot of the issues that a lot of us are working on are not going to be resolved. So it's more an issue of like, how do you deal with a career that has a lot of conflict in it for 30, 40, 50 years? And I have found a lot of trainings in terms of thinking, about meditation and contemplative practice to be super helpful. One of the first papers I wrote on this topic was about contemplative practice, because it really was like these issues of how do you take a breath? How do you, and it sounds a little bit wacky to some people, and that's fine, but that really is one of the only places where you can find sort of professional level training on how to sit with uncomfortable emotions. So that's one thing. And the other thing I will say, in terms of what Mary's talking about, over time, I have also learned that sometimes the direct discussion for those of us who are maybe, I'm often also the only woman in the room, often, is to actually have a more subversive approach to conflict, which has to do with sort of not necessarily saying the thing in the room, but talking to everybody afterward. There are a lot of ways to think about getting yourself heard. And a lot of that has to do with establishing relationships of trust with people, and having sometimes a group situation. And sometimes that takes longer than you want, especially in your early career. That can be very frustrating. So yeah, I'm happy to talk with you more about it. It's really a lifelong process for a lot of us. So take heart.
I just want to add that I think active listening can contribute to that. When you really open yourself up to hearing someone, and even if that is on the other side of where you are, then that kind of starts to build a bridge, because then I can ask the other person to please open themselves up to me, or at least I can attempt that. And that that sometimes takes a while until that actually happens, but I think listening is a really important skill in conflict.
And just one little tiny thing, I'm not afraid of conflict. I'm one of those people who's fascinated by it. And so I'll use my voice to clear the floor if I know somebody needs to speak, and I will just I'll make the space and hold it for them so that they have an opportunity to say what they need to say by taking a deep breath. So if you're one of those people like me, do that for your junior staff and make sure they have a chance to open up.
Clearly, this is something we've all thought about a bit. I just have one actual addition, Rose. I just have to say, I think this was a really great question, and it is a struggle sometimes. I want to echo Mary's deep breath. And then what I also do is I always carry paper with me and pens. And if I can just jot down a few words on things that I need to say in response, that helps so much to keep me grounded in whatever, when I do speak. And that's just a tool that's always helped me. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone that stayed a few minutes late. This has been such a great event. And thank you, Dale and Rob, for being here. It was just a pleasure to have you here, to see you. And I want to thank the audience, both virtually and on Zoom, our panelists, Cindy for moderating, and we are going to do a little raffle. So how are we doing that, Sabrina? I have the book. It's on the floor right there. And who did not get a raffle ticket? Raise your hand. Everybody in the room has a raffle ticket. Okay, that's good. And since the author's here, we can assure you that this book will be signed. Okay, the winner is number 489050. Woohoo, Camiar, yay. That's great. Well, some of you may know Camiar Gavechi. He works at Department of Water Resources, has for some time, and we're so glad that you're here, Camiar, and congratulations on your book. Don't forget to get it signed. Okay, we are adjourned, and thank you so much for coming.